It does not appear on any architectural blueprint, yet it exists. It is not acknowledged in any legal record, yet it operates. And those who step too close to it never return the same. By day, the art district appears immaculate. Sunlight washes over concrete facades once forged for industry, now reborn as galleries, studios, and cafes. Visitors wander freely between exhibitions, cameras raised, capturing murals and installations valued in the millions. Creativity feels effortless here, as if inspiration itself has been engineered into the walls. This place is celebrated as a sanctuary, a monument to artistic freedom, a symbol of modern cultural rebirth. But monuments have foundations, and foundations are rarely beautiful. When night falls, the transformation is subtle, yet unmistakable. Lights dim in long corridors. Footsteps echo where no one should be walking. Security cameras, according to those tasked with monitoring them, occasionally rotate toward blank walls without command. Alarm systems activate for no discernible reason, their piercing tones stretching into the early hours of the morning. The official explanations are mundane. Electrical interference, old infrastructure, human error. The people who work the night shift tell a different story. They say no one patrols alone after midnight. They say something moves behind them, fast enough to be felt, but never seen. No shadow, no reflection. Only the sensation of proximity, accompanied by the sound of breathing where no mouth should be. Some report whispers, fragmented and unintelligible. Others describe a scent that does not belong to any object or flower. Sweet, metallic, and briefly overwhelming before vanishing without trace. These accounts circulate quietly, passed between guards, technicians, and maintenance workers. They are rarely written down. Fewer still are officially reported. Rumors alone do not create fear. Patterns do. Over the course of several years, an unsettling trend emerged. Artists associated with this district began to suffer abrupt and irreversible fates. Sudden deaths ruled accidental. Disappearances that produced no evidence. Careers ended overnight by injuries that defied probability. Each incident, when isolated, appeared tragic but explainable. Together, they suggested something else entirely. Coincidence is comforting. Structure is not. Online forums began to ask questions that formal institutions avoided. Why did these events cluster around a single location? Why did they disproportionately affect individuals described by colleagues as unusually gifted, emotionally intense, or creatively obsessive? And why were certain areas of the complex persistently inaccessible, cited as under maintenance, for years without visible progress? The prevailing narrative insisted there was nothing beneath the surface. No hidden levels, no sealed chambers, no restricted zones beyond what was publicly disclosed. Yet archived construction records hinted at inconsistencies. Floor plans that did not align. Utility routes that led nowhere. References to subterranean spaces that no longer appeared in updated documentation. Most dismissed these findings as bureaucratic oversight, until one artist posted a final message that suggested otherwise. A photograph, a caption, and a warning that in hindsight read less like metaphor and more like a confession. But every rumor only truly ignited when an artist left behind a final message, as if he already knew exactly what was waiting for him. In 2019, the first fracture in the district's polished facade took a human shape. He was known, at least within certain circles, as a multimedia artist who did not fear confrontation. His work was ambitious, conceptual, and often unsettling. He built installations that forced viewers to consider the anatomy of obsession. The architecture of grief, the quiet violence of memory. Critics praised his willingness to approach subjects most creators avoided. Friends described him as disciplined, methodical, and intensely private. What he posted that night looked harmless at first. A simple selfie. A composed frame. A controlled expression that suggested neither panic nor confusion. He stood beside a display case in low light, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Inside the case sat a metal object shaped like a seven-pointed star. Its edges were sharp enough to seem ceremonial. Its surface caught the dim illumination with a cold, deliberate gleam. The piece had a name. It was presented as an artwork. Yet even in still photography, it carried the aesthetic of a device rather than a sculpture. It looked engineered, locked into purpose. Something meant to hold, not to decorate. The caption beneath the image contained only 4 characters. A short phrase, stark and final in tone, commonly rendered as a single intent: to confine a spirit and deny its passage onward. It read less like artistic commentary and more like an instruction, or a warning. Within hours, people began to share the post. Some praised it as provocative. Others asked whether he was referencing folklore. A few, already attuned to the district's nocturnal rumors, claimed the phrase was not metaphor at all. They insisted it was a term used in older practices to describe containment. 38 hours later, news spread through social media with the momentum of panic. Accounts varied. Details did not align cleanly. But certain elements repeated with an eerie consistency. His body was reportedly discovered within the district. Some described it as suspended, motionless, the posture of a person no longer capable of resistance. His head angled downward, his arms slack. And yet, in one hand, he was said to be gripping something so tightly that witnesses remembered the tension in his fingers. A red cord, not a common fiber, not a casual accessory, vivid in color. Unnaturally vivid against the muted palette of concrete, steel, and shadow. Whether it was truly present at the scene, or whether the image became a symbol that memory later embroidered, is difficult to prove. What matters is how quickly the cord became an anchor point for fear. It was the detail people could not forget, because it felt like a signature. Authorities moved with predictable speed. A formal inquiry, basic interviews. A conclusion that, on paper, made sense. The death was attributed to a fall from height. Tragic, but not unprecedented. In an industry where pressure, isolation, and exhaustion are constant companions, an accident is always plausible. The official record closed with efficiency. The public did not. In the days that followed, online communities began to dissect the final photograph. They enlarged it, adjusted contrast, compared reflections, ran the image through filters designed to reveal what the naked eye might miss. At first it seemed like desperation, conspiracy shaped by grief, the kind of obsession tragedy often produces. Then one detail turned the discussion into something sharper. In a reflective surface within the frame, there appeared to be a figure standing behind him. The outline resembled a person. The posture was upright. The proportions were human. But the face, where a face should have been, contained no features, no eyes, no mouth, no structure. Only a vague absence, as if the image had refused to render what it captured. Skeptics dismissed it immediately. A trick of light. A distortion caused by angle. A shadow cast by equipment outside the frame. Supporters of the paranormal explanation insisted the opposite. They argued that the emptiness was the point, that it was not a failure of the camera, but a presence that did not behave like a presence should. And then the caption returned, newly sharpened by context. To confine a spirit and deny its passage onward. If that phrase was not poetic flourish, then it implied knowledge, not belief. Knowledge. It suggested that the artist understood exactly what the object represented and what it could do, or what it had already done. We should be cautious here. A photograph does not constitute evidence of the supernatural. Online analysis is not a forensic method. And yet the investigation, as it was publicly described, left gaps wide enough for imagination to walk through unchallenged. Why post that phrase at all? Why stand beside that object? Why, less than 2 days later, did his name become the first in what many now call a pattern rather than a coincidence? Some insisted he was chasing inspiration too aggressively, that he wandered into restricted areas, that he took risks no one should take in a place filled with industrial remnants. Others believed he uncovered something and made the mistake of documenting it. A few went further, claiming he had been selected rather than endangered by accident. In the absence of transparent answers, the district's night rumors gained weight. Cameras turning away from corridors, alarms without cause, guards refusing to patrol alone, and now, a death that many could not reconcile with a simple fall. Because if he was not alone in that photograph, then the most important question is not how he died. It is what had been standing behind him, silently and patiently, long before the moment the camera shutter closed. If he was not alone in that photograph, then the real question is, what had been standing behind him all along? The second death did not arrive quietly. Unlike the first, this one unfolded in full view of the public eye, wrapped in anticipation, invitation lists, and scheduled appearances. The woman at its center was not an obscure figure, working at the fringes of the art world. She was recognized, followed, documented. Her presence alone drew attention, and when she announced her upcoming solo exhibition, the district responded accordingly. The exhibition carried a name that unsettled even before it opened. It translated loosely as "The One on the Other Side," a title that suggested separation, distance, a boundary implied but never clearly defined. More troubling was her choice of location. Rather than selecting one of the open, heavily trafficked galleries above ground, she insisted on hosting the exhibition in a subterranean space. The third basement level. A section of the complex that, according to official statements, had been closed for extended maintenance. Electrical systems, ventilation upgrades, structural inspections. The reasons varied depending on who was asked. What remained consistent was access. It was rarely granted and never casually. Yet for her exhibition, an exception was made. Invitations were issued to 200 guests, collectors, journalists, industry figures. Each received formal confirmation. Each name was recorded. Each seat accounted for. On the evening of the opening, security logs confirmed that only 199 tickets were scanned at the entrance. The discrepancy should have been noticed immediately. It was not. According to a senior guard interviewed later, under condition of anonymity, the list itself contained 200 names. He remembered that clearly. What he could not recall, despite repeated questioning, was the identity of the final entry. No photograph, no contact information, no personal details that could be traced. The name, he said, looked complete, familiar even. Yet when pressed, it refused to anchor itself in memory, as if it had never belonged to anyone at all. The opening began without incident. Guests descended into the lower level in small groups, guided by dim lighting and a narrow passage that felt deliberately constrictive. The artist arrived last. She appeared composed, calm. Her expression carried the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to scrutiny, but witnesses later remarked on her eyes. They said she looked distracted, as if part of her attention remained elsewhere. She chose to enter the exhibition space alone. Moments before doing so, she initiated a live broadcast on her social media account. The footage was grainy, the connection unstable. Still, viewers could see the environment behind her. Concrete walls, temporary lighting, shadows that stretched longer than expected. She spoke briefly, thanking those who could not attend in person. Her voice was steady, measured. Then she said something that caused several viewers to pause the replay later, just to be certain they had heard correctly. She stated that she felt as though she was occupying two places at once. The comment passed without immediate reaction. Some assumed it was poetic language. Others interpreted it as nervous humor. No one challenged it in real time. Seconds later, the broadcast cut to black. Attempts to reconnect failed. Messages went unanswered. Inside the exhibition space, guests waited for her return, assuming technical difficulties were to blame. When she did not reappear, security was alerted. A search began, cautious at first, then increasingly urgent. Her body was discovered the following morning, near an emergency exit on the same subterranean level. The scene defied easy categorization. There were no signs of forced entry. No indication of a struggle. Her posture suggested sudden interruption rather than prolonged distress. Her eyes remained open, fixed on nothing, yet bearing an expression that multiple responders described as unmistakable terror. In her hands, she clutched an empty frame. The frame was meant to display one of her most recognizable self-portraits. A piece that had been catalogued, insured, and transported with care. It was not found at the scene. It was not found anywhere within the exhibition space. It vanished without explanation. Affixed to the inside of the glass was a small slip of paper bearing 3 characters. Their meaning was debated almost immediately. Some translated them as a form of blessing. Others argued the phrase implied a conditional reward. Not salvation, but postponement. A second allowance. A second grace. Investigators struggled to connect the elements. An absent artwork. A missing minute of footage. A phrase that refused to settle into a single definition. As before, the official conclusion favored natural causes compounded by stress. A sudden medical event. An unfortunate coincidence. But coincidence was becoming difficult to defend. Online discussions drew lines between the two deaths with alarming ease. Both artists had been deeply engaged with themes of duality, containment, and transition. Both left behind messages that appeared intentionally sparse yet semantically loaded. Both were last seen near spaces that were technically inaccessible. And now, both were associated with objects that did not behave like ordinary materials. The empty frame became an obsession. If the missing portrait represented her identity, then what did it mean that it had been removed? Or taken? Or replaced by nothing at all? More troubling still was the question of the 200th guest. If only 199 people had entered the exhibition, then who occupied the remaining place on the list? And why did no one remember encountering them, despite security footage showing a brief anomaly in the count during the initial descent? The pattern was no longer subtle. 2 artists. 2 deaths. 2 messages that suggested prior awareness. two locations beneath the surface, and an emerging sense that participation itself carried a cost. If the first death hinted at surveillance, this one implied invitation. And if something had been waiting behind the camera before, then perhaps this time it had been formally welcomed inside. When the two deaths were placed side by side, it became clear they were not merely similar in outcome, but in preparation. After the second death, the story stopped behaving like rumor. It became a system, assembled piece by people who did not trust official silence. They did not have badges or warrants. They had archived screenshots, cached pages, and the obsessive patience of those who sense that something is being concealed. Their work was uncoordinated, and yet it moved with the logic of necessity. Follow the objects, follow the access points, follow the places that remain locked. Two items kept recurring in every thread of speculation. The seven-pointed metal piece and the red cord, not as metaphors, as mechanisms. The first significant break came from a place most institutions overlook, a niche forum frequented by construction workers, engineers, and architectural technicians. A single user, anonymous and careful, claimed to have been part of a renovation project years earlier. He did not identify the client. He did not provide dates. He wrote in a style that suggested fear rather than attention-seeking. He described a night shift assignment in a subterranean section that was not listed in the public plans. According to him, the worksite was cleared unexpectedly. A group arrived without identifying credentials. They carried a case of brass spikes and a diagram that resembled a star chart. The spikes were placed into the floor in a precise arrangement, matching the geometry of a constellation. Each spike, he stated, bore an engraved name. Not a label, a name. When other users asked what kind of names, the writer paused, then answered with a phrase that could not be easily translated into a single English equivalent. It conveyed the idea of people who were gone, but not simply dead. People removed, cut away from the record of ordinary existence, as if their lives had been taken off the map of continuity. The post remained visible for only a few hours before it disappeared. In its place appeared a brief administrative message, warning readers not to dig, because one might dig into something that does not sleep. The deletion did not end the discussion. It accelerated it. Screenshots surfaced along with crude sketches that purported to depict the red cord. The description that circulated next was far more elaborate than anything previously shared. The cord was said to be braided from human hair, coated in wax, and treated by heat. Not for durability alone, but for ritual stabilization. It was referred to by a term that implied binding, sealing, and control. In the folklore attached to the object, the cord offered a specific trade. The bearer could perceive what ordinary people could not. Voices from the deceased. Fragments of language that did not belong to the living. But the price was exact and finite. The person who handled it, the story claimed, would survive a set number of days, and then be pulled into the same confinement they had attempted to access. Whether such claims originated in authentic tradition or modern invention remains unclear. What is clear is how quickly the cord became integrated into the narrative of death. It offered a framework that made the earlier events feel less random. It transformed the two artists into components of a procedure. That is when a separate figure entered the story. A researcher operating under a pen name began publishing a long analysis that blended historical references, geomantic theory, and modern mapping tools. He did not describe himself as a believer. He presented himself as methodical. He overlaid the complex's layout against detailed topographic data, then compared the district's structural nodes to older patterns of reinforcement, once used to stabilize a site's energetic flow. His conclusion was not subtle. He suggested that the complex had been designed or later modified to function as a containment array. 7 primary anchor points. Strategic positions. A pattern that did not prioritize aesthetics, but control. In older frameworks, he wrote, such stabilization required an offering. Not blood in the crude sense of horror fiction, but vitality. People whose creative intensity was believed to produce unusually potent energy. In his language, the district did not merely display art. It harvested artists. The publication was extensive, thousands of words, dense with diagrams and citations. It spread rapidly through private groups. Then it vanished, removed without explanation, as if its disappearance were itself an argument. What followed was the most disturbing phase of the public's informal investigation. Lists began to circulate, not just the 2 names already discussed, but others. Individuals who had exhibited at the site or been invited into restricted areas. Some were confirmed dead. Others had vanished from public life with no clear explanation. A small number remained alive, but injured in ways that ended their careers permanently. The pattern once suggested became difficult to ignore. Management responded with force. Statements were issued. Denials repeated. Legal notices sent to platforms. They asserted that no secret basements existed beyond standard storage and mechanical infrastructure. They framed the entire phenomenon as mass hysteria produced by internet storytelling. But denials do not erase what people believe they have heard. A short audio file began circulating privately. It was distorted, voices altered, speed manipulated. Still, certain phrases could be extracted with careful listening. The setting appeared to be a closed meeting. The tone, urgent, directive. One voice emphasized a rule. No guests were to be allowed into a particular basement level after a fixed hour. Even in an emergency, even if alarms sounded. Then came the line that caused listeners to replay the clip again and again. A reference to a level that should not exist. A designation that implied a deeper basement beyond what had been acknowledged. And beneath the speech, a sound persisted. A steady metallic tapping, measured and rhythmic like a clock built for funerals. Near the end of the file, another voice cut through. Colder. Less altered. It delivered a command that did not sound like administration. It sounded like ritual maintenance. Check the binding cord. If it breaks, the whole level will lose its restraint. No one could agree on what lose its restraint meant. Some interpreted it as structural collapse. Others feared something less physical and far more intimate. The release of what had been held in place by force rather than consent. And that was the moment the story stopped being about 2 artists. It became about a boundary, a line drawn beneath a celebrated district. A line guarded more aggressively than any exhibition. A line that, according to the audio, could fail. Because if that cord truly breaks, what is released might not be only a spirit. At this stage, every explanation feels insufficient. Official statements insist that nothing exists beneath the surface beyond ordinary infrastructure. That there are no sealed chambers, no concealed levels, no ritualized systems masquerading as architecture. And yet, the accumulation of inconsistencies has created a question that refuses to remain buried. If nothing is there, then why is access so carefully regulated? If nothing is operating, then why does maintenance require secrecy? And if nothing has been taken, Then why do so many names quietly disappear after passing through the same corridors? We are told to accept coincidence, to trust that tragedy, when it strikes repeatedly in one place, is still random. That creative intensity attracts risk. That stress explains everything. These arguments are not irrational. They are simply incomplete. Because coincidence does not require containment. What emerges from the collected fragments is not proof in the judicial sense. It is something more fragile and therefore more dangerous. A pattern of preparation. Objects that behave as if designed for a single purpose. Restricted spaces treated less like rooms and more like thresholds. Language that appears again and again, referencing binding, sealing, restraint. If the theory holds any truth at all, then the district is not merely a site of art. It is an apparatus, one that depends on participation rather than force. The artists were not dragged inside. They were invited, celebrated, given space, attention, and opportunity. They entered willingly, unaware that the exchange might extend beyond exposure and reputation. In older belief systems, places of power demand balance. What is taken must be replaced. What is stabilized must be fed. If such logic has been embedded into modern infrastructure, disguised beneath galleries and exhibitions, then the danger does not lie in superstition. It lies in continuity. Because structures do not stop functioning simply because people stop believing in them. The most unsettling element is not the deaths already discussed. It is the possibility that they were not anomalies, but maintenance. That loss was not a malfunction, but a requirement. And that whatever is being restrained beneath the district has never been removed, only managed. The audio recording suggested as much. Not panic, not discovery, routine. A reminder to check the binding, to ensure stability, to prevent release. Which raises a final question that no official response has addressed. If the cord were to fail, if the anchors were compromised, if the level that is not supposed to exist were suddenly exposed, what exactly would surface? A spirit, a memory, a force accumulated through decades of containment. Or something that no longer remembers what it was before it was sealed. Perhaps the most troubling thought is this: even if the stories are exaggerated, even if the rituals are misinterpreted, even if the structure beneath the district is entirely mundane, the reaction to scrutiny was real. Information was erased. Access was restricted. Silence was enforced. And silence is rarely the response of those with nothing to hide. The question then is no longer whether the place is dangerous. It is whether we are meant to look away while it continues to operate. Because the problem is not whether such a system could exist. It is how many other places may already be functioning in the same way, hidden beneath monuments we trust, sustained by people who never realize they were part of the design. The issue is not whether that place exists. It is how many others are already operating, and how long we have been trained not to look beneath them.